The year is 1453, and the air over Constantinople is thick with smoke and screams. The mighty Theodosian walls, standing strong for 1,000 years, are crumbling under the relentless assault of the Ottomans. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI grips his sword, knowing this may be his final stand. The last remnants of the Roman Empire, a civilization that had endured for more than a millennium, are about to vanish before his eyes. How did an empire that once ruled the Mediterranean, that preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages, that dazzled the world with its wealth and power, come to this desperate moment? This is not just the fall of a city, it's the end of an era, the closing chapter of Byzantium, the empire that refused to die for nearly 12 centuries. Picture a world where Rome never truly fell. It simply moved east, transformed, and survived. The Byzantine Empire was Rome's secret successor, a medieval superpower shrouded in intrigue. It saw emperors rise from peasant origins, empresses defy convention to rule with iron wills, and innovations like Greek fire that struck terror into enemies. Yet it also faced devastating plagues, brutal civil wars, and betrayals that shook its very foundations. How did Byzantium last so long against impossible odds? And why, after outlasting every rival, did it finally collapse into history? In this journey, we'll uncover the empire's greatest triumphs and its darkest hours. We'll walk the halls of the great palace where plots and poison shaped destinies. We'll stand alongside the Varangian Guard, Viking mercenaries who became the emperor's last line of defense. And we'll witness the final, heartbreaking siege of Constantinople, where the last Roman emperor met his fate. The story of Byzantium is one of resilience, mystery, and lessons that still echo today. So stay with us, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the medieval world forever. To understand how Byzantium rose from Rome's ashes, we need to step back 3 centuries before Constantinople's fall, to the reign of a visionary emperor who changed everything. Constantine the Great didn't just adopt Christianity, he built a new capital that would become the beating heart of an empire. In the year 330, he stood on the shores of the Bosporus, where Europe meets Asia, and saw the perfect fortress city. This wasn't just a strategic move, it was a rebirth. Constantinople wasn't called the New Rome for nothing. It had 7 hills like its Italian sister, a senate, and even its own chariot races. But beneath the surface, everything was shifting. Latin, the language of old Rome, gradually gave way to Greek. The empire's religious center of gravity moved east too, with Orthodox Christianity developing its own rituals and theology separate from the Pope in Rome. The empire's structure transformed as well. While the West crumbled under barbarian invasions, Byzantium perfected a centralized government that could weather crises. Emperors ruled with divine authority, backed by a sophisticated bureaucracy that kept taxes flowing and armies supplied. The provinces were reorganized into themes, military districts where farmer soldiers protected the land they worked. Geography played a crucial role in Byzantium's survival. Constantinople sat at the crossroads of trade routes linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its triple walls guarded a peninsula that could be defended by sea on 3 sides. The city's massive granaries and underground cisterns made sieges nearly impossible to sustain, a lesson invaders would learn the hard way for centuries. But the Great Divorce with Western Rome came in 476, when the last Western emperor was deposed. While Europe plunged into what we call the Dark Ages, Byzantium kept alive Rome's legal traditions, military strategies, and artistic achievements. The Eastern Empire didn't just survive, it thrived, creating a vibrant fusion of Roman government, Greek culture, and Christian faith that would define medieval civilization. This cultural alchemy produced something entirely new. Byzantine scholars preserved Plato and Aristotle while Western libraries burned. architects combined Roman engineering with Eastern domes to create landmarks like Hagia Sophia. Even the empire's struggle shaped its identity. The relentless Persian and Arab attacks forged a society that valued survival above all. As we'll see, these foundations allowed Byzantium to outlast its Western counterpart by nearly 1,000 years. But this resilience came with trade-offs. The empire's Greek character sometimes put it at odds with Latin Europe, while its complex bureaucracy could become a web of corruption. These tensions would surface dramatically when Crusaders arrived centuries later, men who should have been allies, but saw Byzantium as something foreign, even heretical. The stage was now set for Byzantium's golden age, where one ambitious ruler would push the empire to its greatest extent since ancient Rome. But even as new territories were conquered, an invisible enemy was gathering strength, one that would test the empire's foundations like never before. Now we arrive at a turning point where Byzantium reached dazzling heights only to face unimaginable devastation. Justinian I stepped onto history's stage in the year 527, determined to restore Rome's ancient glory. This was no idle dream. Backed by his brilliant general Belisarius, Justinian launched daring campaigns to reclaim lost territories. Belisarius became the empire's sword, retaking North Africa from the Vandals in an astonishing 9 months. Then came Italy, where his outnumbered forces captured Rome itself after a grueling siege. For a brief moment, it seemed the Mediterranean might once again become a Roman lake. But these victories came at a steep cost, draining the treasury and stretching Byzantine armies dangerously thin. While Belisarius fought on distant battlefields, Justinian revolutionized law at home. His legal team compiled centuries of Roman statutes into the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. This monumental work didn't just preserve ancient wisdom, it streamlined Byzantine bureaucracy and became the foundation for European legal systems centuries later. Imagine drafting laws so precise they'd guide nations over 1,000 years into the future. But Justinian's most visible legacy still stands today in Istanbul's skyline. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just another church, it was a statement in brick and mortar. Architects pushed Roman engineering to its limits, creating a dome so vast worshippers claimed it hung from heaven by golden chains. When Justinian first entered the completed cathedral, he reportedly whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." This architectural marvel became the beating heart of Orthodox Christianity for 900 years. Yet even as Byzantium glittered, disaster lurked. In 541, rats carrying infected fleas disembarked from Egyptian grain ships. The plague of Justinian spread like wildfire, killing perhaps half the capital's population at its peak. Corpses piled so high they overflowed burial pits. The empire lost taxpayers, soldiers, and artisans. An entire generation vanished. Though Justinian survived the sickness, his dreams of restoration withered with his workforce. So was this Byzantium's golden age? The answer lies in the contradictions. Justinian reclaimed Rome's old territories but bankrupted his successors. He codified enduring laws but ruled as an autocrat. His Hagia Sophia still inspires awe, yet the plague left the empire vulnerable to new threats. Perhaps the true Byzantine spirit emerges here, flawed, resilient, and forever walking the tightrope between grandeur and survival. As we'll soon see, one remarkable woman stood beside Justinian through all these triumphs and tragedies. Her story reveals how Byzantine power could flow through unexpected channels, shaping the empire from behind the throne. Yet behind every great emperor often stands an even greater partner, and Justinian found his match in the most unlikely place. Let's turn our attention to Theodora, the actress turned Empress who defied every expectation of her time. Born around the year 500, Theodora began life in Constantinople's gritty entertainment districts. Her father trained bears for the Hippodrome's games while she performed comic and likely risque sketches onstage. In an empire where actresses were considered one step above criminals, This was hardly the resume of a future ruler, but Theodora possessed something far more valuable than noble blood, an uncanny understanding of power. Her meeting with Justinian changed everything. Smitten by her wit and political instincts, the future emperor overturned ancient laws to marry her in 525. When he took the throne 2 years later, Theodora didn't just stand beside him. She ruled alongside him as co-regent, a title never before granted to an empress. Byzantine coins told the story, minted with both their profiles facing forward as equals. This wasn't mere symbolism. Theodora established her own court, received foreign ambassadors independently, and even vetoed her husband's decisions. Her finest hour came during the Nika riots of 532, when chariot racing factions united against Justinian's heavy taxes. As mobs burned half the city and proclaimed a rival emperor, the panicked council urged fleeing. Theodora's response became legendary. "Purple makes a fine shroud," she declared, referring to the imperial color. "I would rather die reigning than live without power." Her defiance steeled Justinian's resolve. Belisarius' troops slaughtered 30,000 rebels in the Hippodrome the next day, cementing the imperial couple's grip on power. But Theodora's influence extended far beyond crisis management. She pushed groundbreaking reforms for women, outlawing forced prostitution and granting mothers greater rights in child custody cases. She sheltered persecuted Monophysite Christians despite Justinian's orthodox stance, proving religion could be personal rather than political. Even her enemies acknowledged her brilliance. The historian Procopius, while scandalized by her early career, admitted she was sharper than a scorpion's sting. What makes Theodora's story extraordinary isn't just her rise from obscurity, but how she wielded soft power in a world dominated by swords. She proved that in Byzantium, influence could flow through whispers in the throne room as effectively as battlefield commands. While Justinian built monuments, Theodora reshaped society's foundations, one law, one policy, one daring speech at a time. As we'll see next, their combined legacy would face its greatest test not from rebellions or rivals, but from an invisible enemy creeping through the empire's bustling ports. But even the most brilliant rulers need more than laws and speeches to defend an empire. Now we turn to the battlefields where Byzantine survival was decided not just by courage, but by groundbreaking military ingenuity. At its peak, this empire perfected weapons and strategies so advanced they seemed almost supernatural to enemies. Take Greek fire, the napalm of the medieval world. Imagine being an Arab sailor in the 7th century, seeing golden flames leap across water toward your ship, flames that water only spread. This liquid terror, sprayed from pressurized bronze tubes called siphons, saved Constantinople time and again. The formula was so secret that even today, we can only guess its mix of petroleum, pine resin, and sulfur. When the Muslim fleet besieged the city in 674, Greek fire turned the sea into an inferno, burning entire navies. Yet innovation wasn't limited to fire. The Byzantines mastered psychological warfare with their thematic armies. Instead of costly standing forces, they divided the empire into themes military districts where farmer soldiers trained in return for land. These part-time troops knew their home terrain intimately, ambushing invaders like the Bulgars in mountain passes. Their flexibility stunned larger armies, proving that a well-placed few could outmaneuver thousands. Then there were the Theodosian walls, Constantinople's legendary belt of stone. 3-layered walls stretched 4 miles across the peninsula, with a moat, outer rampart, and inner wall towering 40 feet high. For 800 years, these fortifications laughed off sieges. Attila the Hun took one look and turned away. The Avars and Persians shattered armies against them. Even when enemies breached the outer defenses, they'd find themselves trapped in killing zones between the middle and inner walls, a deadly maze of murder holes and catapults. But here's the haunting question. If these systems were so brilliant, why did they eventually fail? Part of the answer lies in complacency. later emperors neglected the thematic armies, relying too heavily on expensive mercenaries like the Varangian Guard. And while Greek fire terrified foes, its secret recipe was eventually lost or replicated by enemies. Most critically, the walls that had defied generations finally met their match with the advent of gunpowder cannons. The Byzantine military machine was a masterpiece of adaptation until the world changed faster than they could. Next, we'll see how another kind of fire, one of faith and division, began burning from within the empire's heart. While military threats battered the empire from outside, a different kind of battle raged within one that split the Byzantine soul. The empire's greatest strength, its deep Christian faith, also became its most dangerous fault line. At the heart of this strife lay two explosive questions: who was Christ and how should believers honor him? First, consider the theological earthquake of monophysitism. Unlike the official Chalcedonian Christianity, which taught that Christ had both divine and human natures united in one person, monophysites believed he had only a single divine nature. This wasn't just scholarly debate, it shook empires. Alexandria and Antioch, major Byzantine cities, fervently embraced monophysitism, while Constantinople and Rome condemned it. Emperors like Zeno tried patching the rift with compromises like the Henatican Decree, but these often backfired, alienating both sides. The divisions ran so deep that when Sasanian Persians invaded in the early 7th century, some monophysite communities saw them as liberators from Chalcedonian oppression. Then came the firestorm of iconoclasm. In 726, Emperor Leo III shocked the empire by declaring religious icons, paintings, and statues of saints were idolatrous. Overnight, soldiers whitewashed mosaics, smashed sculptures, and burned priceless artworks. For over a century, Byzantium tore itself apart over whether destroying icons purified Christianity or murdered its heritage. Iconophiles, led by fierce defenders like Saint John of Damascus, argued icons were windows to the divine. They whispered of miracles, weeping portraits of Mary, healing touch of apostle images. Meanwhile, iconoclast emperors like Constantine V claimed they were restoring true worship, even composing theological treatises against dead wood and paint. The cost was staggering. Imagine walking into Hagia Sophia during iconoclasm, its glittering mosaics scraped away, leaving blank shadows where Gabriel's wings once shimmered. Monasteries, the empire's cultural engines, were ravaged for sheltering forbidden art. Worse, the controversy became political dynamite. When Empress Irene restored icons in 787, she did it through the Seventh Ecumenical Council, asserting church authority over imperial decree. Then Emperor Leo V revived iconoclasm decades later, only to be murdered by icon-loving conspirators. This cycle of destruction and restoration bled the empire dry. Each flip-flop alienated regions. Italy drifted toward the papacy. Armenians deepened their separate identity. Most crucially, it wasted energy Byzantium desperately needed against rising threats like the Bulgars and Arabs. By the time icons were permanently restored in 843, the empire had lost not just art but trust between rulers and ruled capital and provinces. Yet from this ashes emerged an unexpected legacy. The eventual triumph of icons birthed the radiant Byzantine art we cherish today, from Vladimir's Virgin to Mount Athos frescoes. Even the debates forged theological tools that later shaped both Catholic and Orthodox thought. But in the moment it was clear, no enemy could fracture Byzantium like its own divided heart. Next, we'll meet the emperor who temporarily mended these rifts with iron and gold, Basil II, the Bulgar slayer. Now let's turn our attention to one of Byzantium's most formidable rulers, a man whose name struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, Basil II. Rising to power in 976, he inherited an empire still reeling from internal divisions and external threats. But where others saw chaos, Basil saw opportunity. His reign would become a masterclass in ruthless efficiency, military genius, and economic revival, setting a standard later emperors could never match. Basil's defining challenge came from the west, where the Bulgarian Empire under Tsar Samuel had been carving chunks out of Byzantine territory for decades. This wasn't just a border dispute, it was a fight for survival. Samuel's forces raided deep into Greece, even threatening Thessalonica, Byzantium's second city. For the first 25 years of his reign, Basil methodically prepared his response. He rebuilt the army, replenished the treasury, and waited for his moment. That moment came in 1014 at the Battle of Claudion, where Basil trapped Samuel's forces in a mountain pass. The result was a slaughter so complete that when Samuel escaped, he reportedly died of shock upon seeing his broken army. But Basil wasn't finished. To ensure Bulgaria never rose again, he made an example of 15,000 captured soldiers, not by killing them but by blinding them. Every 100th man was left with one eye to lead the others back to their Tsar. This grisly display, earning Basil the nickname the Bulgar Slayer, wasn't just cruelty. It was psychological warfare on an unimaginable scale. When Tsar Samuel saw his mutilated army returning, the legend says his heart gave out on the spot. Within 4 years, Bulgaria was fully absorbed into Byzantium, ending a century of conflict. Yet beneath the bloodshed lay a shrewd administrator. Basil reformed the tax system to prevent wealthy landowners from dodging payments, forcing the aristocracy to fund his wars. He stockpiled gold so effectively that the treasury held over £200,000 when he died, enough to run the empire for years without new taxes. He also strengthened the theme system, the backbone of Byzantine provincial defense, ensuring frontier regions could defend themselves without draining Constantinople's resources. Here's the tragic irony. Basil's overwhelming success masked the empire's underlying weaknesses. His iron grip prevented the nobility from challenging him, but it also stopped them from developing leadership skills. His hoarded wealth discouraged successors from maintaining fiscal discipline, and his military victories created an illusion of invincibility that later emperors would fatally believe. When Basil died in 1025 after 49 years of rule, he left no heir and no system for orderly succession. The powerful empire he built would unravel within decades as weaker rulers squandered his legacy. For now, though, let's witness Byzantium at its most formidable, a realm where gold flowed, enemies trembled, and one man's will shape the fate of millions. Next, we'll see how this mighty empire became entangled with an unexpected force, the Crusaders from Western Europe, with consequences no one could predict. But as the dust settled on Basil II's reign, Byzantium's fortunes began to shift in ways even the Bulgar Slayer couldn't have foreseen. The empire's next great challenge wouldn't come from a rival kingdom or a barbarian horde. It would arrive in the form of fellow Christians from the west. The Crusades, those holy wars launched to reclaim Jerusalem, would soon twist into a nightmare for Constantinople, revealing just how fragile alliances could be in the medieval world. It all began with a desperate plea. By 1095, Emperor Alexios I was staring down an existential threat. The Seljuk Turks had overrun Anatolia, Byzantium's heartland, and now perched just across the Bosporus. With his armies stretched thin, Alexios did something unprecedented. He wrote to Pope Urban II, begging for mercenaries to help reclaim lost territory. What he got instead was the First Crusade, a zealous tidal wave of knights, peasants, and ambition. At first, this seemed like divine intervention. Alexios shrewdly demanded oaths of loyalty from Crusader leaders like Godfrey of Bouillon, extracting promises that reclaimed lands would revert to Byzantine control. And when the Crusaders miraculously captured Jerusalem in 1099, Byzantium briefly basked in the glory, but cracks appeared fast. The Westerners viewed their Eastern allies as suspiciously effete, while the Byzantines saw the Crusaders as uncouth barbarians. One chronicler wrote of the Latins, "They trailed filth behind them like a comet's tail." The Second Crusade deepened the rift when Emperor Manuel I Comnenos failed to support the Crusaders' bungled siege of Damascus in 1148. Accusations of betrayal flew. Then came the Third Crusade's chaos after Saladin retook Jerusalem. Frederick Barbarossa's German army crossed Byzantine lands like a locust swarm, prompting Isaac II Angelos to secretly ally with Saladin, a move that shocked Christendom. But nothing compared to the catastrophe of 1204. The Fourth Crusade, intended for Egypt, detoured to Constantinople after Venetian merchants demanded payment for ships. What followed wasn't conquest, it was annihilation. For 3 days, Crusaders raped, pillaged, and defiled the city they'd sworn to protect. A survivor, Nistus Choniates, described nuns violated on altars, ancient statues melted down, and libraries set ablaze. The very air was thick with screams. The Venetians hauled off the 4 bronze horses of the Hippodrome, while French knights crowned a drunken prostitute on the Patriarch's throne, the ultimate irony. Many crusaders had never intended to fight Muslims. As one knight's letter admitted, "We came for money, not salvation." When the smoke cleared, Byzantium was carved up like a feast among thieves, with a puppet Latin empire installed in Constantinople. The Crusades, born from a plea for help, had gutted the empire that once ruled the Mediterranean. And as we'll soon see, even when Byzantium clawed its way back, it would never be the same. The sack of Constantinople was just the beginning. The once mighty Byzantine Empire now found itself carved up like spoils among the Crusaders, launching an era that would test its very survival. For 57 agonizing years, a puppet regime known as the Latin Empire ruled from the battered halls of the Great Palace, but their grip was shaky from the start. The Crusaders divided Byzantine lands into fiefdoms. Venice took the strategic ports. French nobles claimed Thrace and Greece, and rival factions squabbled over the remnants. Yet Byzantium wasn't dead. Like embers scattered from a fire, 3 defiant rump states kept the flame alive. In the mountains of western Anatolia, the Empire of Nicaea emerged as the strongest successor, led by the cunning Lascaris dynasty. Across the Black Sea, the Komnenos family clung to power in Trebizond, ruling from a fortress city perched on sheer cliffs. And in the rugged highlands of Epirus, another Byzantine faction carved out a realm dreaming of revival. These weren't just survivors, they were incubators of resistance, preserving Byzantine law, art, and faith while the Latins floundered. The Latin Empire, by contrast, was a hollow imitation. Their rulers, like Baldwin I, struggled to control their own knights, let alone the resentful Greek populace. Without the Byzantine bureaucracy, taxes went uncollected, roads crumbled, and the famed Theodosian walls languished unrepaired. One visiting cleric wrote, "They dress in purple but rule in chaos." Meanwhile, the Nicaeans grew stronger, retaking land piece by piece under leaders like John III Vatatzes, who shrewdly married into the Bulgarian royal family to secure his borders. Then came the masterstroke. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaiologos, Nicaea's ambitious general-turned-emperor, struck a secret deal with the Genoese. Their fleet smuggled his troops into Constantinople under cover of darkness, catching the Latins off guard. When dawn broke, Byzantine banners once more flew over the city. Crowds wept as the Patriarch reinstated the ancient liturgy in Hagia Sophia, its mosaic scrubbed clean of Catholic alterations, but victory came at a cost. The restored Byzantium was a shadow of its former self, bankrupt, depopulated, and surrounded by enemies. Anatolia was slipping to the Turks, the Balkans simmered with rebellion, and the Venetians still prowled the Aegean. Michael VIII's triumph was bittersweet. He'd reclaimed the throne, yet as one chronicler put it, the crown fit a smaller head. The empire's next chapter wouldn't be about restoration but survival. And as we'll see, even the most cunning rulers couldn't hold back the tide forever. Even as Michael VIII celebrated his hard-won victory, the cracks in Byzantium's foundation were already spreading. The Palaeologan dynasty, though it would rule for nearly 200 years, presided over an empire in relentless decline. Civil wars became a cruel tradition, tearing the realm apart from within. Brothers fought brothers, nobles backed rival claimants, and mercenaries switched sides for gold. The empire's remaining resources were squandered not on defense or growth, but on these endless power struggles. Meanwhile, the Ottomans were rising in Anatolia, transforming from raiders into conquerors. Their leader, Osman I, carved out a small principality that would soon grow into an empire. Byzantine generals underestimated these newcomers, dismissing them as just another band of Turkic horsemen. But the Ottomans were different. They absorbed Byzantine tactics, recruited Christian mercenaries, and mastered siege warfare. By 1326, they had captured the critical city of Bursa, turning it into their capital. The Byzantines, distracted by internal feuds, barely reacted. Economic decay made everything worse. The hyperpyron, Byzantium's gold coin, had once been the standard of Mediterranean trade. Now debased and devalued, it was barely worth the metal it was stamped on. Venetian and Genoese merchants dominated commerce, setting up shop in Constantinople itself. The empire's famed silk workshops, once a state monopoly, were now outsold by Italian imitations. Desperate for cash, emperors sold crown jewels, leased islands, even pawned religious relics. One visitor noted, "The imperial treasury holds more dust than gold." Territorially, the map kept shrinking. Serbia and Bulgaria gobbled up Byzantine lands in the Balkans. The Ottomans crossed into Europe in 1354, seizing Gallipoli and cutting off Constantinople's supply routes. By 1400, the empire was reduced to little more than the capital, a strip of coastline, and the Peloponnese. Emperors became vassals, paying tribute to Ottoman sultans just to keep their throne. Yet even in this twilight, the Palaeologans clung to grandeur. They staged elaborate ceremonies in the Great Palace, as if pretending nothing had changed. Scholars still debated ancient philosophy, artists crafted exquisite icons, and the court maintained its intricate rituals. But the truth was unavoidable. When Manuel II toured Europe begging for aid, one French noble sneered, "What empire? You rule a city, not a kingdom." The final blow came from within. In 1448, Constantine XI took the throne, inheriting a hollow crown. He was competent, brave, perhaps even capable of saving a healthier state. But Byzantium was beyond saving. The Ottomans, now led by the brilliant Mehmed II, encircled Constantinople like wolves. The empire's once proud walls were crumbling, its armies outnumbered, its allies indifferent. The Palaeologans had lasted longer than anyone expected, but their story was nearing its end. Yet amidst this slow unraveling, the lifeblood of the Byzantine Empire still pulsed through its markets and trade routes. The story of Byzantium wasn't just written in battles and betrayals. It was also etched into the shimmer of silk and the scent of spices. For centuries, the empire's economy thrived on its mastery of trade. Constantinople sat at the crossroads of the world, where the Silk Road met the Mediterranean. Caravans from China unloaded bolts of silk, while ships from Egypt and India brought pepper, cinnamon, and precious gems. The Byzantines didn't just move these goods, they transformed them. State-run workshops turned raw silk into dazzling fabrics, dyed in imperial purple and woven with gold thread. These weren't just textiles, they were power. Emperors gifted silk robes to foreign rulers, a silent statement of Byzantine wealth and sophistication. But the real genius lay in control. The empire monopolized silk production, punishing smugglers with death. For a time, this kept Europe desperate for Byzantine luxury. Then came the betrayal. In the 6th century, two Nestorian monks allegedly smuggled silkworm eggs out of China in hollow walking sticks, handing the secret to Emperor Justinian. Whether legend or fact, Byzantium soon had its own silk industry and a stranglehold on the market. Money told the same story of rise and fall. The hyperpyron, a gold coin so pure it rang like a bell, was once the dollar of the medieval world. Merchants from Venice to Baghdad trusted its weight, but as the empire weakened, so did its currency. By the 1400s, hyperpyra were so diluted with cheaper metals that traders preferred Venetian ducats. The very coins that once symbolized Byzantine power now revealed its decay, and Venice, the lagoon city, played the long game. Once a loyal subject, it grew fat on Byzantine weakness. Venetian merchants secured tax exemptions, set up shop in prime harbors, and even controlled entire neighborhoods in Constantinople. When the empire couldn't pay its debts, Venice took islands as collateral. By the time the Palaeologons realized their mistake, the Serenissima's galleys held more Byzantine wealth than the imperial treasury. Even the Varangian Guard, those axe-wielding Norse mercenaries, became part of the economic tale. Their salaries paid in gold drained the treasury, but their presence reassured traders. A Viking with a two-handed axe at the palace gates meant commerce could flow safely. Yet as funds dried up, so did the guards' numbers, leaving the markets vulnerable. Artifacts whisper this history. A fragment of 11th century silk, its colors still vibrant, shows the eagle of Byzantium woven in thread. A devalued hyperpyron, nicked and worn, sits beside a gleaming Venetian ducat. Together, they tell of an economy that once commanded the world, then became a prize for others to claim. As the Ottomans tightened their grip, the last Byzantine merchants bartered not silks but survival. The spices still flowed through Constantinople, just no longer for its benefit. The empire that had turned trade into an art form now watched as others grew rich on its corpse. The market still bustled, the harbor still bristled with masts, but the gold no longer flowed to the palace. It sailed west to Venice. Yet even as the empire's wealth slipped away, its artistic soul remained untarnished. The Byzantines built monuments not just to God, but to their own indomitable spirit, and nowhere shines brighter than in the golden glow of their mosaics. Step inside Ravenna's San Vitale, and you'll find yourself surrounded by walls that shimmer with divine light. Tiny glass and gold tiles, each no larger than a fingernail, come together to create breathtaking scenes. Here, Emperor Justinian and his court seem to step out of history, their purple robes and jeweled crowns frozen in eternal splendor. Notice how the emperor holds a bread basket, not a sword or scepter, a subtle declaration that Byzantine power was as much about feeding souls as ruling bodies. This was no accident. Byzantine artists followed strict rules, their work serving as theology in color. Figures weren't meant to look human, but heavenly. Wide, staring eyes connected viewers to the divine. Gold backgrounds erased earthly space, placing saints and emperors outside time. In the apse of Hagia Sophia, a Virgin Mary mosaic gazes down with infinite compassion, her blue robes shimmering against a golden sea. This wasn't decoration, it was a direct line to God. The same celestial vision filled illuminated manuscripts like the Vienna Genesis, one of the oldest surviving biblical picture books. On purple-dyed vellum, a color reserved for emperors' scribes, painted scenes in silver and gold ink. Watch as Rebecca waters camels at a well, her robes flowing like liquid metal. These weren't mere illustrations, but portable churches that wealthy Byzantines could hold in their hands. Every curled vine, every haloed saint whispered the same message. Heaven and earth met in Byzantine art. But perhaps nothing declares Byzantine ambition louder than their domes. When architects raised Hagia Sophia's mammoth ceiling in the 6th century, they defied physics and expectation. 40 windows encircled the base, making the dome seem to float on light. Procopius, Justinian's court historian, wrote that it appeared not to rest upon solid masonry, but to cover the space beneath as though suspended from heaven. This architectural marvel became the empire's signature, copied from Russia to Sicily, though never equaled. Even today, a whisper in Hagia Sophia's vastness travels clearly to every corner, an acoustic miracle ensuring priests could be heard without shouting. The Byzantines understood that beauty served power. Imperial portraits showed rulers holding crosses and orbs, blending earthly and divine authority. Churches doubled as propaganda. The more splendid the building, the more legitimate the emperor who built it. When Basil I constructed the Nea Ecclesia in the 9th century, he filled it with stolen Roman treasures, literally building his legitimacy on plundered glory. Yet for all its grandeur, Byzantine art also reveals intimate moments. A 12th century ivory panel shows Emperor Romanos and Empress Eudokia kneeling before Christ, but look closer. The Empress's delicate slippers peek from beneath her robes, a humanizing touch in this celestial scene. Even in strict religious art, personal devotion found ways to shine through. As the empire declined, its art became both more emotional and more desperate. Late Byzantine frescoes in Mistras show saints with gaunt, expressive faces, their eyes heavy with knowing sorrow. The Pantocrator in the Chora church doesn't bless, he judges, his stern gaze seeming to foresee the coming Ottoman storm. In these final centuries, Byzantine artists stopped pretending their world was golden and eternal. Instead, they made art that stared unflinchingly at fate, and in doing so, created some of their most powerful work. These stones and pigments tell a story no chronicle could capture. Where treaties failed, art endured. Long after the last emperor fell, Byzantine mosaics still converted hearts in Venice and Sicily. Their domes inspired Ottoman mosques and Russian cathedrals. Even the humble fresco, once painted by anonymous monks in rock-cut Cappadocian churches, kept Byzantine faith alive under Turkish rule. The empire may have fallen, but its visual voice never truly stopped speaking. While Byzantine art dazzled the senses, another quiet revolution was unfolding in the empire's libraries and monasteries, a relentless pursuit of knowledge that would light the way through Europe's darkest centuries. Where much of the West struggled to preserve the remnants of classical learning after Rome's fall, Byzantium became a living archive of antiquity's greatest minds. Take the imperial scriptorium in Constantinople, where teams of scribes meticulously copied ancient Greek and Roman texts onto parchment. These weren't just dry exercises, they were acts of salvation. While Charlemagne's scholars in the West were still piecing together fragments of Latin grammar, Byzantine scholars like Photios in the 9th century compiled the Myrobiblion, a sprawling digest of 280 ancient works, many of which survive today only because Byzantine hands preserved them. Picture this: as Viking raiders terrorized Paris, scholars in Constantinople debated Aristotle's logic and Euclid's geometry over cups of spiced wine. Medicine flourished too under Byzantine innovation. Paul of Aegina, writing in the 7th century, produced an encyclopedia of medical knowledge so advanced it remained standard in Europe for 800 years. His descriptions of surgical tools, bone saws with serrated edges, delicate scalpels for cataract removal, wouldn't look out of place in a modern operating theater. He even prescribed anesthesia, sponges soaked in opium and mandrake juice to dull the agony of amputations. While Western Europe relied on prayer and folk remedies, Byzantine hospitals, some with specialized wards, boasted trained staff who separated patients by disease, a revolutionary concept at the time. The heavens fascinated Byzantine minds just as much as the human body. In the 11th century, scholar Michael Sellos studied an intricate device recovered from ancient Antioch, a mechanical model of the planets that may have been the legendary Antikythera mechanism's cousin. Constantinople's astronomers didn't just track stars, they refined Ptolemy's celestial maps, creating tables so precise they guided navigators from Alexandria to the Black Sea. Meanwhile, in the West, many still believed the Earth was flat. Perhaps most remarkably, this intellectual firepower wasn't locked away in ivory towers. Byzantine engineers applied geometry to fortifications, creating the deadly zigzag walls that repelled invaders for centuries. Farmers used treatises on agronomy to grow olives in the rocky Peloponnese. Even the empire's famed silk industry relied on smuggled Chinese technical manuals, the original industrial espionage. When the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, fleeing scholars carried precious manuscripts to Italy in their saddlebags. These texts, Aristotle's philosophy, Galen's medicine, Archimedes' mathematics, became the kindling for the Renaissance. Dante may have damned Byzantium in his Divine Comedy, but without Byzantine scribes, his beloved Virgil might have been lost forever. The empire's greatest legacy wasn't just what it created, but what it refused to let die. This sets the stage for our next chapter, an empire clinging to life as old enemies return with terrifying new weapons, and a final siege that would echo through history. But even the brightest flames eventually flicker. As the 14th century waned, the Byzantine Empire found itself cornered, not by the weight of time, but by an ascendant power with a hunger for conquest. Enter Mehmed II, the 21-year-old Ottoman Sultan who saw Constantinople not as a relic, but as the jewel missing from his crown. By spring of 1453, he had assembled an army of 80,000 men, along with colossal cannons capable of hurling stone balls weighing over 1,200 pounds. The stage was set for one of history's most dramatic sieges. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI faced impossible odds. With fewer than 7,000 defenders, a mix of Byzantine soldiers, Genos mercenaries, and even monks clutching swords, he ordered the great chain stretched across the Golden Horn and prepared for the end. The Theodosian walls, standing strong for over a millennium, would face their ultimate test. Mehmed's cannons pounded them relentlessly. One eyewitness described the sound as the roar of some unnatural beast shaking the very earth. For 53 days, Constantinople held. Then, on May 29th, the unthinkable happened. A small postern gate, the Kirkeporta, had been left unsecured. Ottoman troops flooded through, swarming the city like a tide. Constantine, refusing to flee, tore off his imperial insignia and plunged into the melee. His final moments remain shrouded in legend. Some say he fell defending a breach near the gate of St. Romanos, his body lost in the carnage. The last Roman emperor died as his empire did, defiant to the end. The aftermath was apocalyptic. Eyewitness Niccolò Barbaro, a Venetian surgeon, wrote of streets running red with blood, and the great Hagia Sophia desecrated, its mosaics shattered as worshippers were dragged away in chains. Mehmed, walking through the ruins, reportedly murmured a line from Persian poetry. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars, yet even in destruction, Constantinople's legacy endured. Greek scholars fleeing the city carried priceless manuscripts to Italy, fueling the Renaissance. The Ottomans, now masters of the Bosporus, would rebuild it as Istanbul, but the soul of Byzantium lingered in every stone. This wasn't just the fall of a city, it was the closing of an era that had lasted 1,100 years. Yet, as we'll see, empires may vanish, but their echoes never truly fade. But as the dust settled over Constantinople, the story of Byzantium was far from over. Its legacy spread like ripples across time, reshaping the world in ways that would endure for centuries. One of the most profound echoes of Byzantium was heard in distant Russia. Grand Prince Ivan III of Moscow married Sophia Palaeologina, the niece of the last Byzantine emperor, in 1472. This union wasn't just a political alliance, it was a powerful symbol. Ivan declared Moscow the Third Rome, claiming the mantle of Orthodox Christian leadership that Constantinople once held. The double-headed eagle of Byzantium became Russia's emblem, and Byzantine rituals infused the Russian court. Even today, the influence lingers in Russia's churches, where golden domes and intricate mosaics mirror the grandeur of Hagia Sophia. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, another transformation was unfolding. Greek scholars fleeing the fallen city carried with them ancient texts, works of Plato, Aristotle, and other classical thinkers that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries for centuries. These manuscripts ignited the Renaissance, inspiring thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Suddenly, Europe rediscovered the wisdom of antiquity thanks to the guardianship of Byzantium. Without this exodus of knowledge, the Renaissance as we know it might never have happened. And then there was faith. The Orthodox Christianity nurtured in Byzantium didn't vanish with the empire. It became a spiritual anchor for millions from Greece to the Balkans and even as far as Ethiopia. The liturgy, the icons, the very rhythm of worship in these regions still bear the unmistakable imprint of Byzantium. Even under Ottoman rule, the Patriarch of Constantinople remained a vital figure, ensuring that the flame of orthodoxy never went out. So did Byzantium truly fall. On one hand, its political power crumbled in 1453, but look closer and you'll see its soul surviving in Russia's imperial ambitions, in the rebirth of European thought, in the hymns of Orthodox churches. Empires may collapse, but their ideas, their art, their faith, those are far harder to erase. The spider might weave its curtains in the palace of the Caesars, but the stones still whisper their stories to anyone willing to listen. And speaking of whispers, some of the most intriguing tales come from the shadows of the Byzantine court, where power, betrayal, and mystery wove their own tangled web. But before we follow those whispers too far, let's pull back the curtain on the Byzantine court itself, a world where intrigue was as common as incense in the imperial chambers. Here, power wasn't just won on the battlefield. It was seized in shadowed hallways, over whispered alliances, and sometimes with a well-placed drop of poison. Take the eunuchs, for instance. In most empires, they were mere servants, but in Byzantium, they were kingmakers. Stripped of the ability to found dynasties, eunuchs like Basil Lecapenus, the illegitimate son of Emperor Romanos I, became indispensable. With no offspring to threaten the throne, emperors trusted them with staggering power, overseeing the treasury, commanding armies, even negotiating with foreign rulers. Basil himself rose to rule as the empire's de facto leader for decades, proving that in Byzantium, influence didn't require a crown. Then there were the dynastic murders, often disguised as tragic accidents. Emperor Romanos II's death in 963 is a prime example. At just 25, the young ruler collapsed after a hunting trip, officially from exhaustion. But rumors swirled that his wife, the ambitious Theophano, had poisoned him to clear the path for her lover, the general Nikephoros Phocas, to seize the throne. Whether true or not, Nikephoros did indeed marry Theophano and became emperor months later. Coincidence? Byzantines didn't think so. Poison was a favorite tool. Empress Irene, the only woman to rule Byzantium in her own right, allegedly laced her son Constantine VI's wine after he tried to overthrow her. He survived the first attempt, only for Irene to order his blinding, a gruesome punishment that left him unfit to rule. Even the imperial dinner table wasn't safe. Emperor John I Tzimisk supposedly died after eating a dish prepared by his own chamberlain, who'd been bribed by the emperor's rivals. The court's obsession with secrecy extended to its rituals. The Book of Ceremonies, a 10th century manual, prescribed every bow, every gesture in meticulous detail, because in Byzantium, even a misplaced step could signal disloyalty. Eunuchs guarded access to the emperor, filtering visitors like gatekeepers of fate. And then there were the famed automata in the throne room, golden lions that roared, mechanical birds that sang, all designed to awe and intimidate foreign envoys. Yet for all its glitter, the great palace was also a gilded cage. Emperors lived in constant fear of betrayal, sleeping in rotating bedrooms to avoid assassins. Some, like Michael III, learned this too late. He was murdered by his own protege, Basil I, who then founded a new dynasty. It was a cycle as old as Byzantium itself. Trust no one, for even your closest ally might covet your throne. And if these human webs weren't tangled enough, consider the relics, holy objects believed to hold divine power. A splinter of the true cross or a vial of saint's blood could legitimize a ruler or curse them. When Emperor Alexios I stole a relic from a rival monastery to boost his authority, monks declared God would punish him. Months later, Alexios nearly died in battle. Coincidence or divine retribution? In Byzantium, the line between politics and the supernatural was perilously thin. Now, if you think these tales sound like something from a Gothic novel, wait until you hear about the empire's lost treasures, vanished relics, and libraries that might still hold secrets centuries later. But that's a mystery for another time. Now, as the shadows of the Byzantine court fade, let's turn our gaze to treasures that vanished into history, objects of such power and beauty that their loss still haunts us today. Among the most coveted was a fragment of the true cross, believed to hold divine protection. Emperor Heraclius carried it into battle against the Persians in the 7th century, only for it to disappear during the sack of Constantinople in 1204. Some claim Crusaders smuggled it to Europe, while others whisper it rests in an unmarked tomb waiting to be found. Then there's the Imperial Library, a beacon of ancient knowledge. Unlike Rome's famed collections, Byzantium's library was said to contain scrolls from Alexandria, philosophical treatises, and even lost works of Sappho. When the city fell to the Ottomans in 1453, rumors spread that scholars hid texts in secret chambers beneath the Great Palace. Centuries later, construction workers reported finding vaults lined with empty shelves, as if the treasures had been hastily moved. Were they burned, scattered, the mystery endures. Statues too met grim fates. The colossal bronze Hercules of Lysippos, once displayed in the Hippodrome, was melted down by Crusaders for coinage in 1204. But not all losses were so blunt. The Serpent Column, a sacred monument from Delphi, still stands in Istanbul today, though its golden bowl and 3 serpent heads were looted or destroyed over time. One head resurfaced in the 19th century only to vanish again during renovations. Such puzzles hint at a pattern. Relics didn't just disappear, they were dismantled, repurposed, or hidden in plain sight. Take the missing relics of John the Baptist. Byzantium claimed his skull, arm, and even strands of hair, objects that fueled fervent pilgrimages. After the Fourth Crusade, these fragments scattered from France to Montenegro. Yet in 2010, archaeologists on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast uncovered a small bone box inscribed with John's name. Was it genuine, or one more thread in a tapestry of forgeries and wishful thinking? Perhaps the most tantalizing clue lies in Venice's treasury of San Marco. Among its glittering hoard is the so-called Tetrarchs, a porphyry statue group pillaged from Constantinople. But here's the twist: 1 foot is missing, replaced clumsily with marble. Was it broken during theft or deliberately left behind as a silent protest against looting? Every scar on these artifacts tells a story of greed, devotion, or sheer chance. So where does this leave us? With more questions than answers. But that's the allure of Byzantium's lost treasures. Their absences speak as loudly as their once splendid presences. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the echoes of scholars, thieves, and emperors all whispering the same truth: what vanishes is never truly gone. It simply waits for the right moment to be rediscovered. Now, as we ponder these gaps in history, let's shift to a different kind of secret, one written not in gold or parchment, but in codes and ciphers. Because Byzantium's mysteries weren't just about what was lost, but also what was deliberately hidden. But beyond the lost relics and pillaged treasures, the Byzantines had another way of guarding their secrets: through the art of hidden messages. Let's pull back the curtain on Byzantine cryptography, a world where words became weapons and every letter could be a lie. Imagine you're a Byzantine diplomat in the 10th century. Your job is to negotiate with rival empires, but one wrong word could spark a war. So instead of trusting scrolls or speeches, you turn to codes. The Byzantines didn't just invent ciphers, they perfected them. Take the famous skytale, a method borrowed from ancient Sparta but twisted into something new. a strip of parchment would be wound around a rod of specific thickness, then written on. Unwound, the message looked like nonsense unless you had an identical rod to decode it. But the Byzantines didn't stop there. Some of their most guarded secrets revolved around Greek fire, that terrifying napalm-like weapon that could burn on water. The recipe was so valuable that emperors reportedly encrypted it in acrostic poems or anagram texts. Even today, historians debate whether surviving hints, mix pine resin with sulfur, distilled twice, are genuine clues or clever red herrings. After all, why write it down when you could embed it in a psalm or hide it in a saint's biography? Then there was the Tacticon, a coded ledger used by the empire's spy network. Agents might send a seemingly innocent merchant's invoice listing 5 barrels of olives when they really meant 5 enemy ships spotted. The key. Only certain officials knew which words were dummies and which held meaning. And if you were caught, the punishment was brutal, blinding, or worse. Now, let's try decoding a real Byzantine cipher. Here's a simple substitution method they used. Each letter of the alphabet was shifted by a set number. For example, if the code was shift by 3, then A became D, B became E, and so on. So the word secret would read VH-FUWA. Easy to crack, not when combined with other tricks like null symbols or split words across multiple messengers. The Byzantines even had a fail-safe. If a cipher was compromised, they'd circulate a fake, decoded version full of disasters to mislead enemies. Imagine receiving a message warning of an invasion only to later learn it was all a ruse to drain your resources. In the end, their greatest cryptographic feat wasn't a single code, but the empire's ability to make truth and lies indistinguishable, and that might be the most Byzantine secret of all. Now, as we step away from the shadows of spies and ciphers, let's meet the empire's most unlikely defenders, a band of Viking mercenaries who became the emperor's personal shield. Now, shifting from the shadowy world of codes and spies, let's turn our attention to the empire's most formidable protectors, the Varangian Guard. Picture this: towering Norse warriors, axes gleaming, standing shoulder to shoulder in the heart of Constantinople. These weren't just mercenaries, they were the emperor's personal shield, a brotherhood of outsiders who became Byzantium's most loyal defenders. The Varangian Guard story begins far from the Mediterranean, in the frostbitten lands of Scandinavia. Young Viking warriors, hungry for wealth and glory, would journey south drawn by tales of Byzantine gold. But what they found was more than just payment, it was a purpose. The emperors, wary of relying on local troops who might betray them, saw in these foreigners the perfect solution. With no ties to Byzantine politics, the Varangians were fiercely loyal to whoever held the throne. Their motto, simple: serve the emperor, not the man. One of the most famous Varangians was Harald Hardrada, a future king of Norway. As a young exile, he joined the Guard in the 11th century, rising through the ranks with his brute strength and tactical mind. Byzantine chronicles tell of his exploits fighting rebels in Bulgaria, crushing pirate fleets in the Aegean, and even serving as a trusted commander in the emperor's campaigns. The wealth he amassed in Constantinople would later fund his quest for the Norwegian throne, but Harald's story is just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The Varangians weren't just muscle, they were symbols of imperial power. Imagine the scene at the Great Palace, golden helmeted guards lining the halls, their two-handed axes, the dreaded Romfire, resting on their shoulders. Their presence was a warning to any would-be conspirator, and when things got bloody, they were the ones who stepped in. During palace coups, it was often the Varangians who decided the outcome, swinging their axes in defense of the rightful ruler or sometimes the highest bidder. But loyalty had its rewards. The Guard was paid in gold, their wages so generous that sagas back in Scandinavia spoke of Byzantium as a land of unimaginable riches. They were given land, titles, and even the right to plunder the imperial treasury after an emperor's death, a tradition known as politasvov or palace pillaging. Yet despite these privileges, their bond with the empire ran deeper than gold. Many Varangians settled in Constantinople, marrying into local families and adopting Greek names, their identities forever intertwined with Byzantium. The Guard's legacy didn't end with the empire. When Constantinople fell in 1453, the last Varangians fought beside Emperor Constantine XI, their axes raised against the Ottoman tide. Though they vanished into history, their spirit endured, a reminder that sometimes the fiercest protectors come from the most unexpected places. And as we leave these Viking warriors behind, our next chapter takes us into the heart of the empire's darkest hours, where plagues and natural disasters would test Byzantium's resilience like never before. Now, as we step away from the clash of axes and the loyalty of the Varangian Guard, let's confront a far quieter but equally devastating force, one that didn't need swords to shake Byzantium to its core. Nature itself seemed to conspire against the empire, with plagues and disasters striking like invisible enemies. The most infamous of these was the plague of Justinian. In the 6th century, as Emperor Justinian I dreamed of restoring Rome's glory, a microscopic killer slipped into Constantinople's bustling ports. Rats carrying fleas infected with the bubonic plague crept from grain ships, unleashing a nightmare. The city's crowded streets became death traps. Victims collapsed with fever, their bodies riddled with swollen, blackened lymph nodes. At its peak, the plague claimed 5,000 lives a day in Constantinople alone. Justinian himself fell ill, though he miraculously survived, but the empire wasn't so lucky. Historians believe the plague wiped out nearly half its population: farmers, soldiers, artisans, all vanishing in a tide of grief. Trade froze, armies weakened, and the dream of reuniting Rome crumbled as quickly as the bodies piled in mass graves. Yet the plague was only the beginning. Byzantium sat on geological fault lines, and earthquakes routinely shattered its cities. In 557, a quake toppled Constantinople's towering Hagia Sophia dome just 2 decades after its completion. Rebuilding drained the treasury, but worse still was the psychological blow. How could God allow his grandest church to collapse? Then came the climate shifts. Tree rings and ice cores tell us of a late antique Little Ice Age. Years of colder temperatures and failed harvests. Famine stalked the countryside, and with fewer farmers to tend the land, tax revenues plummeted. The empire's lifeblood, its people and productivity, was bleeding away. What makes these tragedies eerily modern is how Byzantium's responses mirror our own. Justinian enforced quarantine laws, ordering ships to wait 40 days before docking, a measure borrowed from the Italian term quarantina, meaning 40 days. Sound familiar, but like today, enforcement was patchy and the wealthy often skirted rules. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories flourished. Some blamed the plague on divine punishment, others on poisoned wells. The parallels to modern misinformation are unsettling. Here's the lesson Byzantium teaches us: resilience isn't just about walls or armies, it's about adaptability. When the plague faded, the empire regrouped, offering tax breaks to repopulate villages. After earthquakes, engineers redesigned buildings with lighter domes and stronger foundations. Yet each disaster left scars, chipping away at the empire's strength until, by the 14th century, a single bad harvest could spark riots. As we reflect on these echoes across time, our next journey takes us into the halls of power, where Byzantine women, often overlooked, wielded influence that shaped empires. Their stories reveal a different kind of survival, not against nature's wrath, but against the constraints of their world. But as the dust settled from nature's relentless blows, another force quietly steered Byzantium's destiny: its formidable women. While Theodora's legacy looms large, she was far from alone in defying the empire's rigid expectations. Step into the gilded corridors of the Great Palace, where empresses and scholars wielded power in ways that still spark debate today. First, consider Empress Irene of Athens, the woman who didn't just break the mold, she shattered it. In 797, Irene became the first woman to rule Byzantium in her own right, not as a regent or consort, but as Empress Regnante. Her rise was as ruthless as it was revolutionary. To secure power, she allegedly ordered the blinding of her own son, Constantine VI, after he attempted to overthrow her. Critics called her a monster, but supporters hailed her as a pragmatist in a world that saw women as mere pawns. Irene's reign was brief but pivotal. She negotiated with Charlemagne, nearly uniting the Eastern and Western empires through marriage, and fiercely defended icon veneration during the heated debates of the Second Council of Nicaea. Yet her downfall came just as dramatically deposed and exiled, dying in obscurity on the island of Lesbos. Was she a tyrant or a trailblazer? History still can't agree. Then there's Zoe Porphyrogenita, the so-called purple-born princess whose life reads like a Byzantine soap opera. Born in 978, Zoe spent decades locked in the palace, a political hostage to her father's fear of rivals. But at 48, she finally seized control, marrying 3 emperors in a whirlwind of scandals. Her third husband, Constantine IX, openly kept a mistress in the palace, until Zoe and her sister Theodora had the woman exiled. Yet Zoe's true legacy lies in her patronage. She funded churches, commissioned lavish mosaics, and ensured the empire's artistic flame burned bright even as its power waned. Her critics dismissed her as vain and impulsive, but her cultural contributions outlasted her detractors. And no discussion of Byzantine women would be complete without Anna Komnene, the historian who weaponized her pen. Daughter of Emperor Alexios I, Anna was educated in philosophy, medicine, and astronomy, a rarity for women of her time. After failing to usurp her brother's throne, she turned to writing, producing the Alexiad, a vivid chronicle of her father's reign. Unlike dry official records, Anna's work brims with personal insights and biting commentary. She describes the First Crusade's leaders as bickering fools and doesn't shy from portraying her family's flaws. Some scholars accuse her of bias, but others praise her as the West's first great female historian. What unites these women isn't just their brilliance, it's their contested legacies. Were they power-hungry schemers or visionaries trapped in a man's world? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But their stories remind us that Byzantium's strength wasn't just in its armies or walls, but in the unsung figures who shaped its soul from the shadows. As we turn from these towering women, our gaze shifts to the seas, where Byzantine ships clashed with enemies in battles that decided the empire's fate, sometimes with flames that seemed to dance on water. Now let's set sail into the turbulent waters of Byzantine naval power, where control of the seas often meant the difference between survival and collapse. Picture this: towering Droman warships, their decks bristling with armed sailors, gliding across the Mediterranean as plumes of Greek fire light up the night, a weapon so fearsome, enemies believed it was conjured by dark magic. The Byzantines didn't just rule the waves, they mastered them. Take their legendary defense against the Arab sieges of Constantinople in the 7th century. Facing fleets that outnumbered them 3-1, the Byzantines relied on cunning and chemistry. Greek fire, a closely guarded state secret, was their ultimate equalizer. Imagine the terror of enemy sailors as pressurized siphons unleashed torrents of sticky flames that couldn't be extinguished by water. Some accounts claim it even burned atop the waves, turning the sea itself into a battlefield. This wasn't just weaponry, it was psychological warfare. The Arabs, stunned by these liquid demons, called it naft, and their defeat in 678 marked a turning point. Without naval supremacy, the Caliphate's dream of conquering Byzantium crumbled. But innovation alone couldn't sustain the empire forever. Fast forward to the 9th century, when Crete fell to a band of Andalusian exiles, pirates who shouldn't have stood a chance against imperial might. How Byzantine arrogance played a role. For decades, Constantinople dismissed Crete as a nest of brigands, only to realize too late that these pirates had transformed the island into a launchpad for raids that strangled Aegean trade. The empire's eventual reconquest in 961 under Nicephorus Phocas was brutal, but the lesson was clear: neglect the seas and you invite disaster. The Byzantines also pioneered naval diplomacy. Their Varangian Guard, often linked to land battles, had a maritime role too. Viking mercenaries patrolled the Black Sea, escorting grain shipments critical to feeding Constantinople's 500,000 citizens. When Rus princes threatened trade routes, Byzantine envoys negotiated treaties backed by the implicit threat of Greek fire, proof that their navy was as much a tool of statecraft as of war. Yet by the 12th century, complacency crept in. The empire outsourced its defenses to Venetian allies, a fateful gamble. When relations soured, Venice's fleets became the wrecking balls of the Fourth Crusade. The very waters that once protected Constantinople now carried enemies to its walls. The takeaway: Byzantine naval power was a double-edged sword, brilliant when wielded with purpose, catastrophic when taken for granted. Next, we'll step ashore to explore the Great Palace, where imperial ambition played out in corridors dripping with gold and intrigue. Now, let's step beyond the docks and into the heart of imperial power, the Great Palace of Constantinople, a labyrinth of luxury and legend that few monuments could rival. Built by Constantine the Great himself, this sprawling complex wasn't just a residence. It was a stage for awe, intimidation, and political theater. Imagine gilded halls where ambassadors trembled before mechanical wonders, like the Golden Throne flanked by automated lions that roared and swayed, a feat of engineering designed to convince visitors that the emperor wielded divine power. Even the floors told stories, paved with intricate mosaics of hunts and myths, each tile a whisper of Byzantium's grandeur. The palace was a city within a city. Its courtyards bloomed with exotic gardens where peacocks strutted beneath fruit trees imported from Persia. Hidden passages snaked beneath the grounds, allowing emperors to vanish at will or spy on unsuspecting courtiers. One corridor, the Sigma, curved like a crescent moon, its walls lined with portraits of past rulers, a silent reminder of the dynasty's weight. At its peak, the palace housed throne rooms for every occasion, the Chrysotriclinos, where golden light filtered through alabaster windows, and the Triconch, where emperors dined beneath ceilings inlaid with mother-of-pearl. But the palace's most famous marvel was the Magnora, a reception hall where foreign envoys were dazzled by mechanical birds that sang from golden trees while an organ mimicked thunder. Diplomacy here wasn't just talk, it was sensory overload, meant to paralyze rivals with envy. The message was clear: Byzantium's wealth and ingenuity were limitless. Then came the catastrophe of 1204. When Crusaders sacked Constantinople, they looted the palace with savage glee. Bronze statues were melted down for coin, silk draperies torn to shreds, and the library's manuscripts, some dating back to ancient Greece, fed bonfires that burned for days. The invaders carted off relics like the Zoe mosaic. Her jeweled eyes pried out and turned chapels into stables. What wasn't stolen crumbled into neglect. By the time the Byzantines retook the city in 1261, the palace was a ghost of itself, its gardens overgrown, its halls stripped bare. Later Ottoman rulers built atop its ruins, burying Byzantium's grandeur under mosques and markets. Today, only fragments survive, a mosaic here, a shattered column there, clues to a world that once left visitors speechless. Yet even in ruin, the Great Palace whispers a lesson. No fortress, no matter how opulent, is immune to the tides of greed and time. Next, we'll unravel the eerie tales that clung to Byzantium's court, where emperors feared curses as much as assassins. Now, let's step into the shadows of Byzantium, where history blurs with legend and the line between the living and the dead often seem to vanish. The empire's superstitious heart beat strongest in its ghost stories, tales whispered in palace corridors, scribbled in monastic chronicles, and passed down through generations like sacred relics. Take the chilling account of Emperor Romanos II, whose sudden death in 963 sparked rumors of a spectral curse. Some claimed his wife, Theophano, poisoned him to clear the throne for her lover, Nikephoros II. But others swore his ghost haunted the palace, pacing the Sigma corridor where his portrait now hung, his mournful sighs echoing as if warning future rulers of betrayal. Even soldiers guarding the gates reported seeing his shadowy figure clutching his throat, a grim reenactment of his final moments. Then there was the infamous ruby of Basil I, a jewel said to glow blood red whenever disaster loomed. Passed down through generations, it allegedly dimmed on the night Basil II died and cracked in two when Constantinople fell to the Crusaders. Court astrologers kept it locked in a silver casket, fearing its sightless eye could summon misfortune. But the gem's most macabre legend, that it was carved from the heart of an executed rebel, cursed to forever serve the emperors he'd tried to overthrow. Dreams, too, held terrifying power. Emperor Manuel I Komnenos was said to have dreamed of a golden eagle shot from the sky, a vision his seers interpreted as the coming collapse of his dynasty. Sure enough, within decades the Komnenoi were overthrown. Even commoners clung to such omens. A 12th century nun's diary describes a nightmare where the Hagia Sophia's dome cracked open, revealing a sky black as a widow's veil. 3 years later, an earthquake did just that, sending terrified crowds fleeing into the streets. But perhaps no tale captures Byzantium's supernatural dread like the wailing mosaic of Justinian II. After his nose was slit during a coup, artists depicted him with a golden prosthetic in official portraits. But locals claimed that on moonless nights, the tiles themselves would weep blood, and the golden nose would tarnish as if mourning his mutilation. These stories weren't just entertainment, they reveal a society where every disaster, every twist of fate, was scrutinized for divine or demonic fingerprints. In a world where emperors could be toppled by a whispered prophecy or a cursed relic, ghost stories were more than folklore, they were survival guides written in fear. Next, we'll piece together the final, desperate days of the empire, when even its mightiest walls couldn't hold back the tide of history. The Byzantine Empire's story is one of incredible endurance against relentless odds, a shining civilization that weathered invasions, plagues, and betrayals for over 1,000 years. From Constantine the Great's visionary foundation of Constantinople to the heart-wrenching fall of its mighty walls in 1453, Byzantium stood as a beacon of art, faith, and military ingenuity in an age of chaos. It preserved the wisdom of antiquity, dazzled with golden mosaics, and repelled countless enemies with Greek fire and unbreakable fortifications. Yet, its greatest strength, the ability to adapt, ultimately succumbed to internal strife, external pressures, and the crushing weight of time. What does Byzantium teach us? Perhaps that no empire, no matter how brilliant, is immortal. Its reliance on rigid traditions, coupled with crippling divisions like the iconoclasm debates and the Fourth Crusade's betrayal, left it vulnerable when flexibility mattered most. But its legacy endures. In the domed churches of Russia, the rediscovered Greek texts that fueled the Renaissance, and the spiritual heart of Orthodox Christianity. Byzantium reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, but their ideas can outlast marble and mortar. So, what lessons resonate today? Could America's political fractures mirror Byzantium's religious schisms? Does China's Silk Road revival echo Constantinople's trade dominance? Or might modern Europe's struggles with unity reflect the empire's fatal disunity? The parallels are as haunting as the ghost stories we've shared. Now we turn to you. What do you think modern leaders should learn from Byzantium's triumphs and mistakes? Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation alive. And if you've enjoyed this journey through the empire's golden halls and shadowy corridors, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. The past isn't just a story, it's a mirror. Let's keep looking into it together.